Hiya, this is Kitten Features, and you're listening to Show X Live with Ken in a student accommodation all the way in Scotland. Wait, that was years ago. You're listening to Show X Live with your favorite Scotsman Ken, currently residing in the US of A, and Wayne, mostly from Colorado, but spending way too much time in the Howling Abyss instead of Summoner's Rift. Enjoy the show!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. You are listening live today at 2 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. GMT on this Sunday, the 2nd of August, 2020, everybody. Ooh, into the next month. How is everyone doing? All right. So,
can you believe I've been in the U.S. for almost a year?
Has it already been, Ken? Almost a year already?
Almost a year. It's November, right? But like every month ticks by, and I'm like, man,
that much closer to realizing how long
didn't I
you've been.
Get here?
You're gonna get an old-fashioned Midwestern winter. I guess you've already had one.
He has had one.
Yeah, right? You had the winter of 2019. But the winter of 2019 in America wasn't that cold, was it?
We had a minus 24 Celsius once, which was pretty cold.
I think the main.
Otherwise, no, it's been.
I think the main thing that Ken had to deal with was coming from Scotland, right? Having miserable cold like all the time, right? But actual weather that stuck. So, snow that stays on the ground.
Yeah. That was weird. That plus the difference between a dry cold and a wet cold. Scotland's it'd be like -3, and we'll think it's cold. -3 Celsius.
Yeah.
And but then you experience it here where it's -24, but it's super dry. And it's a totally different experience because in Scotland, a single cold wind, even in like 7 degrees Celsius, because it's so wet, can feel really cold. But here, -15, if it's dry enough, you're just sort of like, it's fine.
Yeah.
But other times there's a slight breeze that comes up like once every couple of weeks, and you feel it, and you
lack of humidity will smooth out the extremes in temperature.
Yes,
as I've learned, spending an appreciable amount of time in Las Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
105 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't feel so bad when the humidity is 0 and you're in the shade. So,
oh gosh,
I have to really be careful.
Yeah.
Now because there's a camera on me, obviously, and so now all of my gesturing and dancing around and stuff that I would ordinarily do when it was an audio-only show. Now I have to do that in order to get away with all of the gesturing and whatnot that I would ordinarily do.
This is what, for many people who have heard your voice over the years, have missed out on, is being in studio with Todd. For those who didn't know, where you might have joked or seen for me over the years as I'm expressive and will talk with my hands, Todd is just as much so, if not more so, expressive with his body language. And so all those conversations, things you would hear on air with Octon Hordak and stuff like that, where it'd be like, guys, this and that. If you're in studio, you're seeing Todd sitting there going like, in your face with the conversation. And so
speculating, yeah.
So one of the reasons we pressed hard to say that, no, Todd, you're going to be sticking around here? We need to make sure we see you as well, because I know everyone out there was looking forward to this moment.
I mean, I have chair danced for more than half of my life now between podcasts and TV shows and radio shows and all the different types of broadcasting that I've been into. So I've always sort of danced and shake in my chair as I'm screaming into the microphone. So get ready for the visual gag associated with that, everybody.
It'll be great. Looking forward to it. All right. So do want to kick us off today, I guess, as a whole. And as we're kind of figuring out the sections and stuff as we're doing, we're trying to focus on these main topics and such as we've talked about in post. But to kind of get you going and catch you up with what we've been up to this week, we are going to start out with a little bit of
dysfunctional deviations.
And to kind of kick things off just with what's been going on recently as we try to keep this section, as we're figuring out to a shorter little bit, just kind of what we've been up to before we get into the main topic somewhere in there about the half-hour mark. Ken, what have you been doing in this last week or so that you want to share with everybody?
Well, mine's going to be very short because I have practically nothing to say. I have one anecdote I wanted to share. And okay, so basically, long story short, and it is a long story. I had to go to the Secretary of State office like 4 times, and it's a 2-hour walk, right? So I had to go there 4 times 4 hours. I spent 16 hours walking over the past month. Like, so it must be like 70,000 steps or something stupid, just trying to get to the SOS and back. Anyway, so I got there and finally in the last time, and I've passed my my written test, which was super easy and no problem. And yeah, so that was all fine. And on the way back one day, I dropped by Target, a store here in the US, and I went to go pick up some milk, and I got a bottle of wine and a few other things, just some essentials, and I got to the self-service checkout, and I tried to scan the wine, and the lady who was working there was like, "Oh, can I see your ID?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm 28, right? And I've got a big old beard." But
That's still...
I guess they can't see the sadness, the depths of sadness in my eyes that comes with age. So I was like, yeah, fine, and I handed her my British ID, right? Because
no.
why wouldn't I? Because that's all I have, right? I mean,
Yep.
I literally was. I'm going to hide all the details, but like, this is a British license. It looks like that, right? I'm hiding all the details, but looks like that. I have a ponytail in that picture.
Wow.
And she says, "Can you turn it around for me?" And I'm like, okay. I mean, on the back of it just has like pictures of different vehicles you're allowed to or not allowed to drive.
Oh yeah.
So I was like, if you really want to know which vehicles I'm allowed to drive in the UK, you can see, I guess. And she was like, "Oh, I don't know if we can accept this." And I like, "Are you a student here?" And I was like, "No, I'm staff. I'm a researcher. I'm a postdoc." And she went, "Uh-huh," like almost like she wasn't believing me. I was like, why would I? What kind of boring student buys a bottle of pink Moscato for a crazy night out, right? Like, maybe if I bought like, I don't know, like Fireball or something, something like some shooters or something that's like a fun drink, I kind of get. But I'm buying a bottle of Moscato and some like vegan patties or something. Like, it was the most boring. Like, I don't know.
You were trying to make it with a women's studies tutor.
I think I am the women's studies.
Moscato and vegan pates, totally. That would totally work.
Yeah. Well, I think I fit quite nicely into that crowd. And yeah, she just gave me this whole talk, and eventually I said to her, I was like, "Look, I'm pretty sure that's a kind of discrimination if you don't accept my license. Like,
Well,
like, it is an official license. If you don't know what it is, call your manager over, right? Like,
one of the
really
challenges,
my problem if you don't recognize it. You don't need to know every single documentation in the world. I understand that, but you don't need to be a douche about it. I mean, like, I've also got my passport and my visa with me. I actually had all of my documentation because I was just trying to get my driver's license. So I had like my social security number. I had a copy of my like lease agreement to prove that I live in the US. I have all this stuff. And like, I would have happily showed her anything, but like, she was too busy just going on like quizzing me on, "So what do you research then?" Like, trying to like get to the bottom of it. Like, I'm gonna catch him out. I'm gonna catch him out.
Yeah, the gatekeepers that feel like they need some way to catch somebody doing something off so that they can feel good about it or something. It's such a bizarre kind of thing you'll run into with, I don't know, the way people feel like they need to somehow, like you said, catch somebody or do something like that. That's so crazy. But I will give at least an understanding that we as the US are not always the most worldly people. And so being able to see multiple IDs or different types of IDs, I have watched people get confused by that just traveling between states and our different driver's license, where you'll have people see them like, I don't know what this is, let alone seeing any information from someone from a different country. But it's like, it's we're the size of of Europe to a degree. And so it's like, imagine that diversity of somebody from the Czech Republic coming over to the UK and doing something where you can imagine some people may never have seen that ID and such. But it is unfortunate that they felt like for some reason a need to quiz you or to learn about your life, because the US citizen in me says, You don't need to know any of that crap. You need to know that this is my
Yeah.
face, this is my age. Let's finish this transaction. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, so that was my little anecdote. It was just a strange one. It wasn't anything major, right? Just like it was fine in the end. It was
Oh,
just
no,
a
it's
bit like
like we should
they,
shame the internet. We should go to reddit.com/r/gamergazi and talk about how Europeans are being harassed and discriminated against in Michigan. I mean, they did vote for Trump in 2016, so obviously it's a bigot haven.
yeah. Well, she did eventually accept my ID in the end.
An awkward silence.
Well, I don't.
goes over the podcast.
I did not get. I did not get the reference. I don't get the reference.
That's okay.
Is it an American thing? Is it
Gamergazi? So Gamergazi is a subreddit that's based off of the Benghazi.
I was gonna say, it sounds like a mix.
All about where a bunch of politically minded, what do you want to call it? Identity politics obsessed people go to whine and complain about video games. I can only imagine the sniveling that's happening about Ghost of Tsushima and the voice actors that may or may not have been Japanese, and how terrible that is, or something. Huh. Like, the only reason why I go there is for Sun Tzu.
Okay.
Okay.
Admittedly, I don't
something completely out of my stuff that I follow on Reddit.
Trust me, they are utterly unimportant.
I tend to avoid most corners of Reddit, especially subreddits outside of.
It's the internet's colon. I
go to the Show X Reddit so that people can talk about our shows. I go to the
reddit.com/r/showx.
And I go to the 3D printing Reddit subreddit stuff, so I can see what people are posting about 3D printing and stuff like that. And is that it? I might have like a science one or two on there that I at least follow on some occasion. Other than that, my exposure to Reddit solely consists of what other people post on other social media sites and stuff, because I fear falling down that trap of things that are, Reddits and such. I've heard about the darker corners and I avoid them.
Like many things, abstinence is the only 100% effective measure.
Right? That is a cancer I do not want to get myself.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's so much crap on Reddit. You know that I constantly see I follow a lot of subreddits that talk about crap that's found on other subreddits, right? But I don't ever see anything that's directly from those subreddits, right? For example, there's a bunch of incel subreddits that I follow subreddits that mock it, right? They're look at these lunatics sort of thing, which is pretty amusing. But I don't actually do anything directly, I'm terrified that I might accidentally be drawn into commenting and disagreeing with somebody on MG Tower or something. And even though I'd only follow it to do that, right, or to view the crazy people there, so I just avoid it entirely, just in case, because I use my real name on Reddit. I don't want to end up having my name in any which way associated with these lunatics, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
This day and age, that could cost you your job.
For sure.
Well, it's the idea that, go figure, there are companies who admittedly want their public face to be fairly mundane so that they can appeal to as wide an audience of consumers as possible. And heaven forbid if someone who is a face of that company, whether they choose to be or not, because that's the employment they have, I can see where companies say, hey, all that really horrific things you were talking about somebody, that doesn't represent us as a company, but people see you when they walk in the door. So, bye.
Yeah.
You are potentially risking our money. It's just the knowledge that, what was the joke? One of the better memes I ever saw was comments about hey, You remember how our parents kept telling us, careful what you post on the internet because it stays forever? And now you see those same parents, the ones suffering those consequences of like, oh, snap, you posted something on the internet and everybody saw and reacted. Remember when you told us not to do that?
Not even that, right? There was a Boeing C-level executive that had to quit because of a New York Times op-ed he wrote in 1989.
I will discuss
about women in combat.
I will discuss that. Unfortunately, that same challenge has gone to extremes that I disagree with.
So,
which is the idea
it's
that
the sort of concept of cancel culture, right? That's what
it is what it is that we're talking around. Yeah. Because you can talk about cancel culture to extremes. And if we want to, at some point, we can get into that discussion a little bit. But essentially, the idea, or my concern with it, right, is it's what we had talked about. It's a follow-on to last week's show, right, talking about review bombing as a form of, if you will, cancel culture. And that idea that groups of people can react to something and try to create such a fever around it to cause some kind of change. Unfortunately, it can be weaponized, and that's what we were talking about, the review bomb piece, to a point where people can target someone and attack them and make an effect on their lives. And unfortunately, some of it, or in the current culture that exists or the way it's being used, there are examples like Todd just brought up about people being held to an account on something that happened years, if not decades ago, and we've talked about this on the show before, at a level of the standards of today's society versus what society was then, and are not being given that opportunity to express, show, or anything about the changes that have occurred in that time for them themselves, and such are just getting hit by this potential rush to action that can result in loss of job, things like that, without a real conversation happening. So there is a huge risk.
We've seen a lot of that. Even the university I work with, MSU, is we've had a couple of major cases with sexual misconduct and stuff where I think it was like a coach or something. It was in the documentaries about it and stuff now, I believe. It was a huge thing. I didn't know anything about this before coming here, but not that would have really changed my viewpoint. I think it was a single individual, nothing. I think that this whole cancel culture thing is difficult. I think it depends on whether it's a single person, whether it's a brand, and whether it's something that's continuing or a one-off, right? For example, say Activision or Blizzard, or take gaming company of your preference, and does something that's clearly racist, and then even after getting called out, they refuse to stop doing it. That's when you stop giving them your money, right? Especially if they refuse to stop doing it. There's no real, argument against that, because then you're paying a racist company. If a company or if a single person does something racist once, realizes it's wrong and it was out of ignorance or something, and they apologize, then that's something that's up for discussion, I think. I think everybody has some racist tendencies inside them, and that can manifest therefore in their work, and that can happen. And that's not necessarily fine, but it's something that as a community we're growing with. And if a company can grow as well, and the people within there can be educated, and the racism can be prevented and halted and removed from society that way, great. But if nothing is done about it, and I don't know, it's this argument of whether you should give your money to them or not is so tough.
Oh no, I talk about if you want to discuss your way of influencing the things around you, and I'm a fan of the whole vote with your dollar concept, especially in a much touted capitalist society that the U.S. tries to be, good, bad, ugly. Speak with your dollar, don't speak with your dollar, however it is. I'm a fan of that. My cautionary tale to all of this is, don't just, if you will, and this is the same thing with all social media stuff you'll hear from Wayne's standing on a soapbox thing, please take a moment to not rush into action on anything you see, because a lot of people are selling emotion and not necessarily logical discussion and fact. And so while you may agree, disagree, or whatever with a thing that someone's saying, before you do that next step of clicking even a like, a share, I'm going to also do something to affect change, please take a moment to really evaluate what it is you're consuming, right? Make sure you take a moment, read it, understand it, I always say if it's something you're just retweeting or something like that, make sure you absolutely agree with it, because when you put it forth, you're basically saying that's my feeling too. And if there's even a problematic piece to it, being the source or how it's presented, maybe don't just share it. Maybe turn around and write your own take on it and provide
That's
that.
what we were saying last week. Yeah.
It's me reiterating that there are ways to still function in this culture without falling into these traps. Because, man, if emotions aren't such a powerful tool that people can use and cause you to react accordingly.
We see this with what Mika Sorona is saying in the chat as well. People act like people can't change their views that they've had 20 years ago. I mean, I think the thing is that you see this a lot with like presidential candidates and other politicians, is a lot of them when they're like either just been elected or preferably once the voting has finished, or if they think it's going to come out anyway, they'll do it during their campaign. They'll often stand up and say, look, I did this thing, I think it's bad, I've grown as a person, I'm sorry. And I think that is a good way of doing it, is owning our past issues that we had and saying we've grown from it. One of the things that really, I don't know if you guys remember, but back in 2016, in 2015, 2016, we were talking about Trump and Hillary and all this stuff, and I don't want to go too political here, but I always said that I didn't like either candidate. And people were like, oh, that's just a cop-out. And I'm like, well, Hillary, back in, like, was it 1998, there was an interview of her. They asked her, like, so what are your thoughts on homosexuality? And she was like, people can do what they want. And then the presenter said something along the lines of, well, what do you think about gay marriage? And she said, well, marriage is for a man and a woman. So it was like, okay, you're pro-gay some stuff, but you wouldn't give them the rights that come with marriage. For example, if your partner dies, and they own the house is in their name, you have to get kicked out, and you're not allowed to go see them, and you're not allowed to arrange a funeral, you're not allowed to attend all that stuff because you're technically not married, right? Well, like that's pretty horrific, right? That's a pretty horrible viewpoint. And I wouldn't mind if Hillary turned around and said, like, look, I was a different person in the past, I've been educated and learned. She never said that. Ever since then, she's always just disagreed and said that never happened. Like, there's an interview of it, there's proof, but she just pretends it doesn't happen.
Well, and so it's valid to judge people based on how they react to their past selves.
Yeah.
Yeah, Todd.
No, I was gonna to as another example, go and find, if you can, a lot of it's probably on YouTube, but go and find all of the discourse around the '94 crime bill.
Oh gosh, yes.
And
the fact that people who
Democrat
are today claiming
Democrat
otherwise
after Democrat defending mass incarceration.
Yeah, no, the whole point that it's
which
like both everyone in the political scene,
that all of the stuff that's happening in America over the last 2.5 months is about.
Well, it goes back to, like, you can go all the way back. Well, there's discussions about where every time laws have been stated from both political parties, main ones in the U.S., never have they actually been for the benefit of the everyman. And they have mostly been laws and stuff to continue the theories and ways about how people were policed or how people were done in action. And both parties were for those things and still are in many ways. And one of those same discussions, right?
Yes.
In the way that we're talking now, because it even goes back to the old argument about the two main parties, about back in the day, which party was it that worked most towards the rights of the minorities, and back to like slavery and stuff like that. That historically you can see when the parties switched on certain stances. And yet, depending on how you
July
choose
1964, for those of you that want to know in the chat, the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Because you'll look, each party was different at different times, but you will see people present arguments like,
I hate that, man.
Oh, you forget your past, you were here. And it's almost that same challenge of that cancel culture type thing, or the thing where you're holding people to the standard of something in the past without accepting, evaluating, or looking if anything has changed since.
Wayne, you're touching on something really, really important, because that whole, I tell you what, if you want to geek out about American electoral politics, The start date is about 1960, and the finish date is 72, 74, 76. Right in there, you're going to see a bunch of fascinating stuff in American electoral politics nationally. What happened? Well, in 1960, California was a Republican state, right? Okay. In 1988, all of the states except Minnesota were Republican states. So when somebody says, like, this state hasn't voted Republican since
Oh, I
1988,
hate that.
no
Yeah.
duh, or 1984, no duh, because all of them did. What's much more interesting is the last time you had this sort of weird electoral map that was not like the South and the Heartland versus the Northeast, the West Coast, and Illinois, was that period between 1960 and 1972 for 76, right? Like if you want to get into that, it's also that time period is also the source of one of the great myths about our two parties,
Okay.
which is that because Republican, thus racist, and it's a lie, right?
Well,
I
have
the
this
reason
weird
why
opinion.
is because after 1968, right, the Republican Party developed this thing called the Southern Strategy, which is the voters in the South that were all old Democrats were not going to be Democrats anymore. And so there are millions of votes on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the thought process was that those people were just, you're not supposed to try and pick up those votes, I guess, is what the idea is supposed to be. So the Southern Strategy was developed by the Republican Party to pick up those votes and to win all of those Southern states, but the people in those Southern states vote Republican because they don't have any other choice. In part because they were betrayed by the party that they had voted for their whole lives, and that their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents all the way back to 1860 voted, right? And they were never going to vote Democrat again, right? So either you leave those votes on the floor or you pick them up and run with them. Well, those people wanted to vote for bigots. And we have data, because in 1968, a bigot ran for president and won electoral votes in the South. So,
Yeah.
All you'd have to do is put an avowed, unabashed bigot in a party, in a political party, put them on a ballot nationally, and give them time on the podium, and the bigots will vote for them.
That
right?
Yeah.
They want one of their own in power. Like, it's not hard to do the mental gymnastics or the mental Lego to get to put these dots together. And yes, Shadow Vice, I'm talking about the Dixiecrats. But they're real. The Southern Democrats were real.
Yeah.
And I hate this
No, you're right.
revisionist history.
Well, it's the idea that, and unfortunately you run into these issues, right? Because we're in the U.S., and we'll finish this shortly here because people who tune in saw the thing. Yes, we're going to be talking about a continuation of last week's story about actual. Well, no, we're about to hit the point of going into the main topic about, what we how we review games and what the context of what makes a good game, and kind of do the conversation of ideas of the elements of how you judge the quality of the games that we play. So we're going to get into that here in a second. That's first hours or half hours for us to kind of chat about what's been going on. And it's like anything. One of the biggest challenges in the United States, and especially as I've talked to too many other countries out there about how their systems work, the U.S. is one of those few large countries that has essentially a two-party system. Most other countries that are industrialized first world type countries have a spectrum of parties, and their way that they elect things are different. I've heard a lot of conversations about like Australia and how they've done it, where they actually don't elect their prime minister, right? They elect the party who is going to put forth their prime minister. And so
we
it's
do the
all
same in the UK. Yeah.
right. And so there's a lot of ways you can do these policies, but in the United States specifically, it is focused on we vote for the guy, right? The person, whoever it is that's going to lead and be in charge of things. And we even screwed it up from what we were way back when we first started, where it was whoever went for president got president, whoever lost for president became vice president in the original system, right? Because that was a way to at least force balance in some form into the government.
I don't know if you guys have heard this, but I love the idea from Brett Weinstein that basically was called the Unity ticket. And at the top of the ticket would be some Navy admiral.
Okay.
But certainly a conservative. And the vice president would be Andrew Yang.
So
and they would run
heaven forbid
in 2020, and then if they would win, right, or whatever, then in 2024 they would reverse. And Yang would be at the top of the ticket, and the admiral would be vice president, and they would go back and forth until they both couldn't be one or the other.
You mean like so many government organizations actually work, where the leadership flips like that, or groups where you say like the first half of a term is led by one person, the second half another. And often when the U.S. it's been done in this almost the exact way, where it's a military person and a civilian, and they flip. And the key is never does one of them have absolute power. It's more that they are the overall decision maker, and they're both an equal, members of that organization, that group. So you don't just hear the one opinion until it switch, right? You hear the conversation the whole time, and there's checks in there. But it allows for some level of a press one way or another as it goes to keep better balance. Not saying it's a perfect idea, but I've definitely seen it happen in some government organizations I've supported. Really what you're saying that I'm a supporter of, Todd, is the idea of the United States needs more legitimate parties as groups that you can get behind as a voter to share your opinion 100%. And to support 100%. The ability to get there. One of the first things I believe personally the United States needs to figure out how to implement is tiered voting, in the sense that you can vote for your primary person that you want. If they statistically will not win, your second vote, you have a tier system of however many votes it needs to be, figure out the details. Your second vote would then be your vote. And such that when people
That's called proportional representation.
And so with that, though, being able to not just stick to, I only have one viable choice because I don't want that person. Instead, you could actually say, I really want to vote libertarian as the person who represents me, understanding that they may not win, but that's my person I agree with the most. If they don't win, here's the second person I vote for. Here's the third. And again, however far down, and weight it.
And so you do like 3 points, 2 points, 1 point, or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or however many choices you want to have on your ballot. And if the third party gets enough points, then they get matching funds.
Well, because that's one of the base things, right? Just to get a true third party support from a government perspective, U.S. perspective, just to have actual third party options. But if we could get into some level of that, because right now, one of the biggest discussions I hear, because I'm trying to press forth the issue of everybody go vote. Out of anything, just everybody go vote. And the problem you hear a lot of people excuse is, like you were saying, Ken, the opinion that maybe I don't really appreciate either of the main options available.
Yep.
And so people will take that opinion and turn it into a non-vote. I won't participate.
I don't like any of the four.
Well, that's the thing, right? You can go levels down, but at least
even the ones of the major parties that aren't going to win.
Yeah. But at least
we talked about the Libertarian last week or 2 weeks ago.
Little bits, yeah.
And
Joe Jorgensen or whatever.
Or Huey Hawkins or Howley Hawkins.
Joe Jorgensen is one of the main ones, and then the VP candidate
and the Green Party is, I think his name is Howie. I think it's Howie Hawkins.
He's not Jill Flanagan. He jumped out.
Well, they may or may not have, but they also may or may not have a legitimate chance at this point, right? And because you mostly hear about things through large networks that control a lot of the information, you may not hear about them. But yeah, I mean, if we had this graduated system, we could do things like, I don't know, put some actual votes in there for vermicide or whatever, the guy with the shoe on his head, and then go beyond that to say, like, other people that may have more of a chance. But yeah, that's one of the things I'll throw out there.
You still can. You can write in Jesse Ventura for president.
But the problem right now is if you write them in, you're only getting that one person as your vote ticket. And so there can be the discussion about whether or not that means you're, quote, throwing away your vote or impacting the vote in your local electoral area.
Yep. There are those who would argue that, and if you're not voting for one of the two major parties, you're throwing your vote away.
Yep, and I hate that stuff. It's just
it's
self-perpetuating, right?
Well, and the main parties want that because it keeps that discussion. They get to say, shut down everyone else. Because if you ever had, almost what you suggested, Todd, a moderate party solution, something that is a blend of the main hot topic issues and more the reality of what I believe most people across the United States truly believe, which is much more close to a balanced view on issues. And you had a party that right? Wouldn't that be a crazy thing to say, wait,
centrism.
Then you could have someone to vote for. And the parties don't want that. And so anyhow, all that discussion to say that, politics are still alive and huge in the United States, and it's going to continue so as we get closer and closer to our election cycle. And my stand on podium thing will say, if you have not yet registered to vote, please do that. If you are worried about what it takes to vote in your local area in the United States, figure out where your polling places are going to be and make a plan for it. You do not have to vote at a polling place on election day. You can vote early at most polling places if you are in a place that doesn't have mail-in voting or drop-off ballots. If you're fortunate enough to be in a place like Colorado where everybody gets mailed a ballot, meaning you have the widest flexibility of voting, take advantage of it. It means you could go mail in your vote, you can go and drop it off at a local place, or you can actually go and vote in person. But in these times where in the United States the pandemic is still real and it is still growing in numbers and hasn't gone away and you are fearful, don't let that stop you from voting. Find the ways to do it. I think I wanted to make sure I get the right thing for it, but there's I'll link it here or have VTW link it. I saw it from the Accidentals because we love the Accidentals and they're pushing this heavy thing about voting. There is a website out there called Mob the Vote, MOBB, thevote.org, that you can go to register, look at, and find out more information about your local voting area to figure out how to vote. Because I'm not telling you how to vote. I'm not telling you who to vote for. I am imploring that you vote. Make your voice heard. It is the primary duty of a citizen in the United States to participate in the mechanism that is the United States is to vote. And I say that truly about most countries. Heck, in Australia, it's compulsory to vote. Like you can get fined and in trouble if you don't vote. What a concept.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's not huge and partial because all you have to do is show up. You can show up and mark, I'm not voting, but you have to show up. And so it's one of those things like, I am a fan of those kind of things. All right, off the soapbox for this so that we get into our main topic today, because not that it's going to lower the energy at all, because we got a lot to talk about. So, wanted to present things. Thank you, Ken, for getting us into that. And Todd, I'm trying to check if there's anything serious I wanted to talk about. Not really. I was going to tell Shadow Vice, like, hey, I was going to do shout out to the fact that we've been playing some Roll20 D&D, and I've been helping and trying to figure out ways to optimize the tools available and such. And a general discussion about optimizing life and that figuring out character sheets and Roll20 that tie together. And I've been through discussions with Lemon Laser trying to figure out ways to automate and better do my financial thing for retirement.
I've got a solution for you on that, actually. There's a connector called Beyond 20.
Okay.
That will D&D Beyond character sheets to Roll20.
Nice.
Some sort of, and it's like a Chrome extension. So
very cool. I used the Roll20 built-in character sheet once Shadow Vice enabled it. And in doing so started playing with and was like, sweet, it's working. And I can't wait because it ties directly into tools. So next time we play, I'll be able to show the rest of the group how I can just click my character sheet and have an action have and roll it versus having to type all the crazy macros. It's like, this is so easy.
That's neat.
Yeah. So that's what I've been doing. Base things.
I can do my geeky stuff in like 6 words.
Cool.
Go for it.
EU for Castile campaign as a colonizer and otter videos on YouTube.
Otter videos?
That's really Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that one you have
and
to
I'm not-
explain. You can't.
I'm not going to get in real deep. Apparently, it's a thing, and it looks like it's mostly a thing in Japan. Although that could just be that the only people that post videos about their otters are in Japan.
Okay.
Oh, it's
But-
their own otter. Just
Apparently,
Wild.
you can domesticate an otter or
Oh.
multiple otters.
Oh God! Don't tell people in the U.S. that.
that's utterly ridiculous.
That is utterly ridiculous. In any event. Ugh.
Dynamite dropped in money. That broadcast school has really paid off.
Oh my goodness.
Nice.
So anyway, no, it's just these videos about these people, and there are two of them that I've been sort of watching off and on that are just like a daily life of an otter. So they go down to the river, and the otter plays in the river, and they do otter feeding time, and they show the otter, and the otter like will stand on its hind legs and make this barking, chirping noise. And then it gets some fish, and then it starts to eat the fish, and then it makes a noise while it's eating.
Oh no.
Imagine if Cookie Monster inhaled a bunch of helium
Oh gosh.
and then ate a cookie. And it started to... Yeah.
I can absolutely see how that could start to consume
Amazing.
your time.
Yeah. Amazing
Because-
and therapeutic.
I was gonna say in the positive
Amazing
way,
and
in that way of like,
Yes.
the
Joe X, one part extreme politics and discussion of social liberties, and one part discussion on and imitation of otters.
Yes. That's what we do. We are a broad show.
talk about
Show
balance.
X.
Talk about balance.
The X
All
is
right.
where you are
Talk
to
about
be.
that.
So, to get us ready, everybody, you have heard us converse in the past, and it even came off of our discussion last week about what it means to, review bomb and how reviews exist for gaming and this community that we support and love. Well, one of the things we got into a tad bit that we wanted to give a little more depth to today was how do you really compare video games, essentially? And so, from the tagline of this show, we're going to start it off with a bit of a discussion between that whole concept about the value, the quality, the pieces, the aspects of the things we enjoy when we game, primarily between, and then we'll expand it beyond, gameplay, that core functional piece of what it is you do when you are engaging with the game itself. What is your goal? What is your process? To your experience you're getting through the entire interaction with the game, and in many ways the story being told through that interaction, and how each of those elements, including other aspects of video games, to include things like the graphic fidelity, the audio, the production value and audio used, to things like the actual user interface you involve yourself in, to features of the games like multiplayer and co-op, and how those basically work to enhance or define your gaming experience. So, to get into this, the whole basis of this discussion that we started with is what makes a game good, or at least that's like a core aspect of the discussion point.
What makes a game a game?
And to extend
that's
it,
even worse. That's a harder question to
okay.
answer.
Well, so let's
So,
start.
I don't think it's that hard at all.
Let's start. Todd, with that as the base question, what is your thought on what makes a game a game? We'll start with you defining it in kind of a base way, and then we'll let Ken and I each kind of
Sure.
what we feel based on what you say.
Two things.
Gotcha.
For a game to be a game, you only need two things. You need a mechanic and a win or a lose condition.
Okay.
Right? Simple example, chess. Right? The lose condition for chess is when a player's king cannot make a legal move and have their king, or if a player, by making all legal moves, will have their king taken in the next turn, that's checkmate and they lose. Right? And the way we get there, there's all sorts of mechanics associated with that. White player, or the player who's sitting in front of the white pieces moves first, black moves second.
Mechanics. The rules
White
of
player moves first.
right. Yeah, there you go. Damn it! I always go second. I don't know why.
Be in shorthand.
Why am I always
It's not
second
good.
when I play chess? I don't get it.
Indeed, yeah.
But
we need to solve the problem of racial discrimination in anonymous online chess.
But essentially what you're saying is there are, like you said a win-lose condition, and you said mechanics, the rules essentially of what you are doing to affect that win or loss.
And here's why I say that. Start really simple, right? Tic-tac-toe has a mechanic and a win condition. Chess has a set of mechanics and a win condition. Checkers has a set of mechanics and a win condition. Crazy Eights, every deck of 52 card game you can imagine, right?
I think we can break this though. What if there's no win condition?
What if there's no win condition? It's not a game.
Okay, so Flight Sims is not a game.
Simulation.
RimWorld, Factorio isn't really a game. Minecraft's not a game.
Now I will challenge what you're saying, Ken.
You have objectives.
Yes,
you know?
I was going to say I challenge what you're saying, Ken, because in a flight sim, and I'll say specifically like Flight Sim 2020 coming out next month or this month, can't wait. The game itself, the engine, the experience, the simulation environment it has is an engine. Within that engine, it provides you an opportunity to explore it as you will, which is a lot of just the sim pass of it. But it also allows the opportunity to do objective-based things within that engine. And so you could argue that Microsoft Flight Sim does have games built into it. Maybe they're mini games in a simulation engine based on this definition, but there are gaming things to do within the experience. Because I would agree if I were to get into I would agree if I were to get into a flight simulator, like a professional flight simulator that I'm just doing to test skills, that's not a game. If you put into said professional flight sim a goal to do so many barrel rolls within this distance while then flying under a bridge and getting timed for it, which puts you at a ranking level, you now have a game.
Or a scoring rubric.
Yes, something that scores how well
one person who sat in the simulator is better than or worse than another person who's in the simulator. And the people who are playing may not even know that this rubric exists. It's a contrivance of video games that we were in the history of video games that were built on chasing a high score. Right, that's part of the arcade culture of the 70s and 80s that we all
you had the original of like
some
Pong,
of us grew up with.
Right? You had the original like Pong, which was literally trying to say, let us do a digital representation of table tennis, if you will, as a way to compete against someone for a score, and thus a win condition, rules, right, and things like that.
Space War, the first video game.
Yeah, going all the way back.
And a win condition.
Okay, but I think that's
shooting at each other.
That's what I'm querying, though.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, Ken. So where is it that you don't see some of these things as having a game element? Because I will agree that Tabletop Simulator is not a game, but Tabletop Simulator contains games.
I would agree with that, but that one makes sense because that's literally just a collection of other games. That one's fine.
But it doesn't have to be.
I'm talking about what?
You could just flip a table all day. You don't have to play the game.
Well, sure, you can say that with any game that has a single win condition. In tic-tac-toe, you don't need to pay a police fine. You can still not.
So then I would ask if you can give me another example or something. Cause I agree in this case more with what Todd's saying.
I'm talking about things that are very open world and they don't have a main objective. Like you can say that you have your own objectives, like Minecraft. You might want to build a city, build a tower, whatever. But there's not or do achievements, right? Which are soft, and they added the end game. But it's literally just a part of the game that you can access called end game that was added after making the game. It's not really an end game, is it? And you can say the same for any game that has, Sim City, right? What's the end condition? You can keep playing forever, pretty much. There's not really an end or win condition to these games. So how are the games?
Well,
yes, you have achievements. Yes, you have these little things that you can set, and you can decide are important to you or not. That doesn't mean it meets this criteria of a win condition.
Well, I would argue.
Okay. So I
go ahead,
agree
Todd.
with you. My counter to that would be because of the scope of the things that we're talking about, like MMOs, like something like SimCity, or especially like, so I haven't touched a SimCity game in a really long time. As I remember correctly, there were scenarios that you could play, and then there was like the open city version. And the sandbox part of it is not necessarily a game, but certainly the scenario parts of it are. So imagine if you played Tropico and you played through one of the main storyline scenarios in Tropico, right? It's clearly a game. Like, very clearly defined win conditions, very clearly defined mechanics. If you're just going to open up the sandbox version and just mess around, I think that may fall into the category of pastime rather than game.
You are using a game engine
stakes,
to spend time.
And the important bit is the stakes matter, right?
Yes.
And the stakes, and then let's be clear, we're talking about games here, so in the grand scheme of things, like real life, the stakes don't matter. But for the purposes of in a microcosm of that one game, like, the stakes are the most important thing. The stakes are the most important thing. Right? Because that's why you're there. Right? There may be all sorts of other contrivances.
I would say that
draw
it's
you in to want to play it, but once you're playing it, the reason why you play the game is to win it.
But what about the games where you can't lose?
So, well, there's still the discussion of if you can have I would say, in my opinion on that, games that have a mechanic where you can continue to retry or you don't really truly have a lose condition, it's still a question of, are there objectives to complete? Is there a scoring mechanism? Is there some way to judge how your experience performed? And I think as long as there's some way to do either a comparison or metric to what you did in the experience, you could still argue that there is a game occurring. Because I will absolutely say that in any engine, in any experience, you can have what is there as a framework that is there to either just present an experience and ability to be there, that until you add, like Todd was saying, some kind of win-lose condition and mechanic, a game doesn't necessarily exist within that space. So I could even bring up like VR chat. VR chat, I don't believe, is a game. I believe VR chat is an experience, a world, a place for people to interact. I believe people have created games within VR chat, but that VR chat itself is not a game. I would in many ways argue to what you said, that Microsoft Flight Sim in a way by itself is not a game, but you can play games within it. I would also say that by a default, based on the original point of it, Factorio is a game because there is a win condition of trying to create a rocket, leave the planet. And once you've hit that, you could arguably say, I won. Now, whether you choose to continue to experience the world because they give you the option, that's up to you. But if you have that objective to at least reach towards and complete that objective, you can arguably say you won. And you might have those specific things of against these conditions because this is the world versus other conditions versus, maybe there's no threat and I'm just doing it to see, did this way of managing my resources and automation allow me to hit that goal, that objective, that point? And I will, on top of all of this, say you can institute your own versions of what are the objectives and what are you trying to do and make a game within any experience. I mean, kids do that all the time when you're playing by yourself on things, but that's where I would actually agree heavily with what Todd's saying about what a game is.
So I want to touch on a couple of things. One, in the MMO case, the win condition is max levels.
Potentially.
Right?
Because I would argue with an MMO...
Once your character makes it to max levels, that character is quote-unquote done, even though it's good economics and game design to give players replayability, in air quotes, with things to do for their character that they just invested some number of hours into in creating or getting to max level. Number two, somebody mentioned catch. I would consider catch a pastime, and we have a problem, and it's not unique to games where we've overloaded the term play.
Yeah.
right?
This
So
is
you
true.
play games, right? You also play sports.
Okay.
You also play, you also play catch, right?
You also
But
play
you also
pretend.
play with dolls. You play with toys. Like toys and games aren't
Well,
the same thing, but we use the same word play to describe our interaction with all of those things.
but I think that's accurate because in all those situations, at least my own personal definition of play, which is that I am engaging in some activity for me to some level of entertainment and I'm interacting in the process. I am
So this is
participating
the point
in
I
this
wanted to get
process.
onto. That's
Well,
the point I wanted to get
I
onto
will
as
keep us
well.
from going too deep into that other than getting back to kind of these actual specifics about the mechanics of the game since we're almost at the top of the hour here. But yes, what are your thoughts on that piece, Ken, about when I brought up that what you're doing when you play? I consider that an action that you're doing within the space of whatever thing you're playing.
Well, aside from the pedanticisms that I've been poking at and raising, I think that the main thing that makes a game is going to be down to, yeah, like was said, the entertainment value, right? Um, but that can be not necessarily fun, right? There's a lot of games that aren't fun, but you still enjoy. Fun being, I don't know, I guess you have to define the definition of fun as well. I would say entertaining, for example, a horror film or a film that makes you cry can be entertaining, even though they don't make you happy, right? I think fun generally implies happiness. I think it's the same with video games. You don't need it to be happy to enjoy it.
Okay, tic-tac-toe is obviously a game and is not entertaining. Once you eclipse
Fair point.
about age 8 and realize that you can play mathematically perfect tic-tac-toe and never lose,
Yes.
right?
Well, I would say that
And
it is a game and it
this is
is
going to get really
fun.
boring for the people in
Well, no,
chat because I'm going to talk tic-tac-toe and
but
Deck of 52 games over and over and over again, but our definitions for these things have to work for all this old stuff. And so video games have to be games, right? Which is not to say that any other form of digital entertainment that tells a story but doesn't have any mechanics doesn't have value. That's not what
okay.
we're talking about, right? And that's something that I want to really stress as we get on into this, because I'm going to start arguing vociferously, I imagine, at some point. It is not my goal nor my intent to say that a walking simulator or a choose your own adventure book written in Twine necessarily does not have value. My point is that we should call these things other things and celebrate them for what they are. And I just don't like that we use shorthand to call them games.
But the last example I'd like to bring up is there was a video game that I can't remember what it was called, but it's on Steam, and I mentioned on the Show X page a few months ago. And the basic concept of this game is that you have a camera and you explore the landscape and you take photos, and that's nice. And the objective could be, I guess, and what makes it
Does it have a
while
defined
there's no
objective?
winning condition. No, it doesn't. But I think you can argue that the prettier your photos are to your previous playthroughs or to other people's playthroughs, the better you are at it or something, right? I guess you could argue that. My point is, but I'm actually of the opinion that pretty much anything can be defined as a game.
Well,
right?
I think
I
you
really
can.
don't think that.
So for me, in that sense, Ken, it goes back to my kind of conversation of saying that I believe that is an engine, an experience, a place you can interact, that you can create a game within. That the existence of it alone is not a game. It's just a play space. It's just something there. That until you do something that meets Todd's criteria of being gaming and doing something that is a game, the engine itself by itself is not a game. Just because it exists, there's a discussion that life.
Sure, but at the same time, if the space where you're walking around or the environment that you're walking around and taking pictures is really just an environment where you walk around and take pictures and there's no scoring in the application itself, I would argue that the game part of that environment is what's happening in the forums, right?
Well,
or what's
so what
happening.
again? What you're
No,
saying is that
seriously,
comparison.
Right.
No,
It's just
the
like-
comparison being done.
/ loot condition is whoever takes the best picture.
If that's what you consider
Unlike when it's
valuable.
running around and I'm snapping pictures.
But that's what I'm
Google
saying.
Maps is not a game, but GeoGuessr
Thank you.
is.
Yes, but that's you're. I think what you're doing is actually informing my point, Todd, that the existence of that experience is not a game. What people do within it and how they now make a comparison is what becomes a game in that engine. And I think that's going to be an important part of this conversation. Because in a lot of ways, I think we're getting very close to a similar discussion point that I do believe, Todd, reaches directly to what you're saying, which is that the game aspect of any experience we have in life is necessary to have some kind of comparison. And that comparison of value, right? Something that shows that one thing is better, more progressed, more something than something else. That anything else you're doing around that point may be enhancing the ability for a game to be played, but isn't inherently by itself a game. Right?
Yep.
Does that at least jive, Ken, to a degree? That you can have environments where games can be played, but the existence of the environment itself isn't necessarily a definition of a game? That until you do something within that environment, there's a game. Now, all of you in the chat can disagree.
Definition.
Yeah, but I think that's still
definition that I think we can all agree on. Yep. I think we can say that a video game is either a visual or audio or both environment where
it goes past that. It could be solely mental.
A video game cannot be mental. A video game
fair.
A video game, I would say.
No, you're right. I was going back to just game. I was just going back to game. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. So yeah, any video or audio game must have some kind of scoring mechanism, some kind of engine of some sort. It can be deterministic or it can be stochastic. It doesn't matter which way. Either which way, it still counts, right? If you have a game like tic-tac-toe or chess that's kind of deterministic, regardless, it's still a game. Or if there has random elements where you don't know what your opponent's going to do each time, that's still a game either which way as well. So long as there is some kind of scoring mechanism, be it defined by the player or by the creators of the engine, it does not matter. It can still be a game. But that's with, as Todd said, that's with the definition of what the word game itself, not video game, but the word game itself means. That it doesn't necessarily have to be its own. How did you put it, Todd? A game doesn't need to have its own. I'm having a brain fart. Sorry.
No worries.
Oh no.
Well, so we got to a definition. Well, no, we got to a definition of generally what a game, and I agree, Ken, to the idea of the display and how it interacts from a video perspective. A video game that we interact in the devices and things we have. So, with that in mind, we talked about in a specific sense. We started out with the conversation coming from Ghost of Tsushima versus The Last of Us 2 as examples. And this started kind of a core part of this discussion we're having today about what about a game makes it good / bad / whatever. And arguably, you could say there's any aspects of the experience that if you're enjoying it, if you're having fun, whatever to level is some level of quality and good. That anything negative, bad, that takes away from your ability to enjoy or something could be a reference to bad. And in doing so, the initial conversation that we'll start with, and it'll expand from there, is what is more valuable in a game? And I will argue there's lots of pieces. The primary ones we talked about were gameplay. And I think, Todd, you described that, and tweak it if I'm not capturing it well enough. Gameplay being the combination of the mechanics toward a win-lose condition and how that's executed and what you as a user does to affect those mechanics towards a goal or objective, towards a win condition.
I think that's a
just a real rough
like
of what gameplay
summary.
is.
Yep.
Story.
Yep. Totally.
And we have authors in the chat that may beat me up on this one. Story is whatever it is that is being expressed along the lines of a subject, a plot or action being occurred towards that goal or whatever's happening that describes the mechanics being employed, the world they exist within, and perhaps presents a compulsion as to why it matters. That
Allow
a
me
story
to
provides more of a
redeem myself.
why versus the mechanics of the how. Ken, please.
Allow me to redeem. Yeah, allow me to redeem what I was previously had a brain fart with. What Todd was saying before was that it's the difference between a game and something that's we need a new definition of the word game and video game because you can have these walking simulators, these dating simulators. Basically, I think simulation is one of the key.
Well, but you
aspects
said
of what
two
makes
things there,
a fuzzy
Ken.
game.
A simulation is an engine. A game can be played within that simulation. So within a walking simulator, you can play a game of get to the highest point, get to this place that you can.
Yeah.
And how long does it take me to get there? Or how high could I get? Those are games you can play within the simulator. A dating sim can include a gameplay of, did I effectively woo this character, thus to successfully enter said date situation, whatever that may mean as what it means to actually succeed. And so you can have a game within the simulation engine or whatever that is that you're giving. So I think there is a point where, and we'll get to this, what we're kind of dancing around is when we start to say the name of these specific genres, we're actually loading onto the term of a game with some specific understanding of what we would expect to do in that game. The interactions we'd have, the way the mechanics would work, and that end state goal are all contained a bit in that name of what we're saying. Dating sim. Oh, I should probably be doing some activity that puts me towards dating something within this engine, this simulation. And so I think there's a nuance there, but I think our what we said about what gameplay is and what story is and what gaming is still applies. And it's just more level of...
Wayne, I want to use a couple of pieces of jargon to try and better define story.
Okay.
So, hope everybody understands what the idea of kayfabe is from professional wrestling.
I'm not entirely sure. Give me a real quick.
The idea of kayfabe is inside the universe of professional wrestling, everything that happens in professional wrestling is real. But for us, who are on the outside, we know
gotcha.
that professional wrestling is that the results are predetermined, and what's happening inside the ring and what's happening in the interviews and the promos and whatnot is all storytelling, right? Like, how do I get from point A to point B, where at point B, the good guy is going to beat the bad guy and win the world championship again after the bad guy does him wrong like 6 months or 3 months or 9 months earlier. So to me, the story is the kayfabe framework that puts me or that either motivates me to play the game or that I get immersed in while I'm participating in the game, but that I know is fake. Like when I load up Ghost of Tsushima, I am not going to Japan in the 12th century, the 13th century, right? That's not happening. So I know it's fake, but inside the universe of Tsushima, like I'm executing Mongols with extreme prejudice.
Yes. I think that's a good point, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen the subreddit r/outside.
No, I
it actually
haven't.
kind of does that. It's great. It does pretty much exactly what you're saying, Todd. But instead of in wrestling, it's the real world, and they act like the subreddit is a forum for discussing the real world as a game. So they'll like talk about glitches that they see when, or these strange features, or how they need to reduce the spread factor on that COVID virus they introduced.
Yeah, the fast travel system in Oslo is getting an upgrade.
You mean the way to describe the real world in gaming terms and mechanics, which I think is valuable, huge, and has so many implications for ways to, as Todd's saying, help encourage people to participate in their life in an organized way, or I think ties to, with the story being what compels you to do it and try to succeed.
And to tease another argument we should have on this show, I hate the our games art argument.
Oh,
I
interesting.
don't think it's
Well,
an argument. I think
wait,
it's just
no.
a definitive.
So
yes.
here's the key: we will table that, and we will keep that as if we want to go into
Yeah,
discussion
no,
on that in
I
the future.
don't want to. I don't want to
Yeah.
have that argument
Yeah.
now. But I'm just saying, like that, because I
I'm
have
putting it in the
a
notes as
massive
something to talk about in
minority
the
opinion
future.
on that,
Yep.
and what it comes down to is why on earth would you optimize in games, which is in part the point, because optimization is the easiest way to win, which is why you're playing.
Aha!
Once
Wait.
you've decided to play a game.
Stop there. That is an important piece because that is, I think, one of the going to be the core things of our whole discussion, which is, oh God, should we even get there yet? But the whole why do you play games?
Well, so and there's two pieces to this, right? This is really complex. So there's before I decide to sit down and play the game, and there's once I've started playing the game.
Okay, that's
so
fair.
Nobody decides to sit down and play a game of tic-tac-toe because tic-tac-toe is not a very good game.
Well, you start at a certain
Once
point where tic-tac-toe is a good game for you because you're 4 years old. Right, when you're starting to understand mechanics. I just say that because tic-tac-toe has a place in life.
Candyland.
Yeah, but it is. It's a easy game to learn.
Right. Once you've decided to sit down and play the game, the point is to win. That's the point of that's the point of games. The point of games is to win.
And I would say maybe. I almost okay.
No,
Ken.
You have to make a conscientious decision to throw a game. Like you have to sit back and decide to play badly. Using tic-tac-toe as the example.
Wait, no. Okay,
if I play
Todd.
Mathematically perfectly tic-tac-toe, I will never lose.
So Todd, I will agree on that base point. I will agree at that. I'll agree at that base point.
One at a time. Jesus.
I will agree at the base point that it is you choose to play a game with the idea that you would like to win. Right? I'll agree with that. Because it otherwise it doesn't make sense in almost any activity, I'd say in life, to go into the desire to start that activity with a belief or goal to fail at it, unless you are choosing to win at something else in that activity. I am going to fail at producing this thing, but in the process, I'm going to learn this thing, which is at my real win condition. So I'll agree with Todd in that sense that you go into a game to play it to win. Because I think there's nuance around this whole, like you said, that's the door you open to say, I'm going to play a game. And because I think that's an important piece to say, you cross that threshold, because now the discussion continues with, I am now playing the game. I've opened the door because I want to play this game because I'd like to win at whatever I'm doing in this game. So now I think there's a nuanced discussion of what does it mean to win? Because while I would say that lots of games provide a known win state, and I think this goes into a lot of what you were saying, Ken, about simulations stuff, individuals can choose what they want to do to win in that moment, in that game, in that thing. I will win, for me personally, like Call of Duty today, playing Call of Duty Deathmatch or something like that, not specifically this time, but a win condition for me, maybe I want to snipe somebody in the head today while they're running. That is the win condition I've set for myself within this game, because it's something I've been challenged with in the past, and I will feel successful in this moment within this game engine, within this game, if I snipe this person. It's me making my own sub mini game within the general context of the game. And maybe it is because we're in a condition where we're not going to win anyways because my team is trash, or I have been so frustrated because in the past I have been hit by snipers so often, I want to better understand what it is they do. So for this moment in time, I'm going to play with this win condition that I personally set because I want to experience this in this game engine I enjoy. And I say that as a very important thing.
The dreaded moral victory.
Moral victory or skill victory, like I'm leveling up a personal skill. I may fail at the win condition of the game for the group because what I am doing at this moment is not going to encourage a high score as a whole. But what I'm working on as a personal skill is the best sniping ability I have so that in future, maybe it does lead to a win state. I'm training. I'm doing something. But because I'm doing that within the context of the game, I am making my own win condition at that moment.
Sure. So this is one of the things that we as human beings can do because we have the ability to cognate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because you can think and evaluate and analyze and synthesize, you can say, we are not going to win this round of Call of Duty.
Yes.
So I'm going to and I don't want to feel like I've wasted my time. And if I just have resigned myself to the fact that we're going to lose, then I will have wasted my time. And in order to lessen that feeling or turn a loss into a win or to
a personal win or something like that, yeah.
Add value to that time that wouldn't ordinarily be there, you've defined a set of goals for yourself.
Yep.
And have decided, again, because you can cognate, that decided that fulfilling those specific goals on that specific map is going to count as a win for you personally. Even though the scoreboard is going to say something potentially different.
Well, and so you could, based on that, evaluate various levels of winning, losing, and success. Because you could easily, if you compartmentalize those, the team lost, right?
Right.
But I successfully completed my personal objective such that whatever happened. And I say that Call of Duty for me is a good one because Call of Duty sometimes has ways that you can complete other objectives in the game that aren't just the win-lose condition. It's the, you need to level up this gun by getting this many headshots with this specific gun in this type of match.
Yes.
And because I've played with a lot of friends who that's their goal for the next week.
Yeah, I'm all for that, and there's certainly value inside of that. And it's a game, but it's a game that you've contrived inside or...
Which I would argue is...
around or within, like, I'm not entirely sure
within
of
the
whole words because...
Well, within the engine or the environment that you're playing in.
We're applying game terminology and concepts and whatnot to, goal setting, essentially.
Yep.
Because what you're really doing is setting goals. Right?
Okay, so...
and achieving them.
With that concept of setting goals to make some kind of win-loss, we're discussing one of the things that really makes, maybe in general, why do you choose one game or another? Why is one game worth playing? Right? To kind of get us towards that discussion point of the topic.
Yes.
Arguably, I think for you, Todd, what about gameplay makes something valuable for you to play? What aspects of the gameplay itself, regardless of the game, makes you say, this is worth my time?
So this is why I brought up the our games art discussion earlier, because in my opinion, games are math, and so it's the application of the math, or my understanding of the mathematics in order to optimize to make the path or to get on the path to winning.
Okay.
Right. Whatever that looks like. And let me tell you something. I don't do it often, right? So one of the things I love about roguelikes is that I can get a victory or loss decision in as little as 2, 5, 10 minutes, and run the thing again, right? And run it again, and run it again, and run it again. It's like, right. So there's value in losing in as much as you can apply lessons learned, engineering term, to future runs.
Okay.
Right? So I know if I touch certain items in the Binding of Isaac with a specific character that drops my health too low and I'm not skillful enough with a D-pad in order to dodge shots well enough, so I need more health points. So the next time that I play as that character, I can, touch different items or touch items in a different order, because sometimes that matters, and be more successful on subsequent iterations through the game.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know if I agree with your point of it being maths, though.
Well,
because Everything is maths. In fact, no, everything is physics, right? I mean, technically
Well,
speaking,
but
if you wanna
physics
go
are
down
defined.
to the
But physics are
Well,
defined
and
by
if
math.
everything is physics, because physics is math, everything is math.
math,
I
so
say
math is just a model of physics.
they do this very well. They do this very well. But before we get to that discussion about the specifics of the maths in gaming, because yes, games are defined by algorithms that have interaction states, right? A 1 and 0 flips based on an action due to the algorithm in a game. And you can go to the depth of what algorithms provide that and how it makes it feel more organic, but in the core sense of things, math is being calculated whenever you run something in a video game to determine your action and how it applies to the world you're in or the experience and level thing you're in. So to provide the context a little further before going into the value between, Ken, I'm going to go to you for a definition on story about what about the story when you are playing a game or games that you've been drawn to or things like that that help motivation for playing the game. What about a story provides for you value in playing that game? And I'm thinking things all the way to like God of War and some of the other ones you've talked about in the past that you've had like, wow, those moments.
Okay, well, yeah, I think the best way to describe what makes story good in a game, you look at examples, right? So, so I agree. God of War is a fantastic example of story as well as gameplay and other things. So I'm
Okay,
not
I'm about to
talking
say,
about that
focus on the
specifically.
story part. Yeah.
But focusing just on the story, it's the same as what makes any story enjoyable. It's something that you can reflect into your own mind as something that either you enjoy the idea of or is something that mirrors what you've experienced in your life, and tells a story that's somewhat unique at the same time. So it's not, you don't want, like, there's a reason that Romeo and Juliet is a classic. There's also a reason that it's not every single story told, right? There's a reason there's a lot of other stories that also exist. It's because it's not, we enjoy variety. We enjoy the odd change in these sort of things.
Gotcha.
So God of War is a great example of a story which is fairly complex. There's multiple characters that you can relate to. Some you agree with, some you disagree with. There's and what's really important is character development, right? You have to really, I think one of the key things we love, especially people like me who love fantasy books, I love seeing the main character grow, right? And that's why I love about fantasy books. And it's also what I really enjoy about stories and games. You see the growth of a character and their struggles and how they deal with those struggles. And I think, for example, another great example of story is Telltale games, Walking Dead. I love that. Like, I remember I sat down to play it with my wife years ago, and like she wasn't particularly interested. And I told her about it. She was like, whatever. Like, Walking Dead's okay. And she said, that sounds nice and all, but I'm just not that. I'm just not so interested. I said, that's fine. I'm going to play for 5-10 minutes, and then we'll go to something else. We ended up playing for like 3 hours, completed the whole thing, and it was just perfection. It was such a good story. We both wept, because it was just that good. And that was one of those games that really only has story elements. Yeah, there's some choose your own adventure elements, but generally speaking, it's just about the story. Now let's look at bad story in games.
Well, wait. So we'll get to some of those because there's the valuation on both. Because so far we've talked about what makes either of those aspects beneficial to you as a person engaging in it to a thing. Because we haven't talked about the tie between them and how they enhance or negate each other as a piece. And I will say we're focusing right now on gameplay and story. I would argue that this is enhanced, and I've seen it in our conversation, some of what like Mika said about the overall experience that you'll get out of some things, to include those things I mentioned in this get-go about audio presentation, the effects of things like multiplayer versus single player, the user interface and how you engage with it, the graphics and how pretty they are or aren't. All of those aspects are elements that enhance the experience or detract the experience. And I say that because there's a weighting that I think goes into this in the long term of the discussion. But I will flip back to you, Todd, to say, now that you've heard like Ken talk about Telltale Games and an experience he had there that was really engaging for he and his wife in going through the process of what the Telltale game provided him. But he also mentioned that thing about the mechanic being much more a choose your own adventure kind of thing. For you, when you start seeing the various games we talked about, and this you can reference like you had the card games and other things in the past. The goal of getting into a game to win, to do whatever, even if your personal moment is a win condition that is not known as the definition of the rules of the gameplay and what they on the card say, here's how you win the game. Where whatever reason you've walked through the door, I'm playing this game because I want to win. Once you've done that and you're now playing the game, what for you is the biggest value in choosing one game over another for entering that win condition, that state you're going to do to why you're playing that game versus another, that kind of thing?
Could be a couple of things. It could be a consistent set of mechanics, well executed technically, with a large variety in how I can interact with those mechanics.
Okay.
I'll give you an example: Monster Train, or Slay the Spire, right? Both of which are great, by the way. And there's story-ish, but again, it's total contrivance. It's a frame around which to get somebody into the ladder climbing aspect of both games, really. Because really what they both are rogue light CCG ladder climbing.
Okay, CCGs essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one example. It's as similar would be true of Europa Universalis 4. Like the variety in that is just so huge. There's so many variables. It's like honestly, it's the ultimate multivariant optimization problem. Right? There's just so many moving parts, and no two games, even with the same country, in Europa, are the same. So you may play 12 games as Austria, starting as Holy Roman Emperor, and all of them will finish differently.
Okay.
And there's not really, there's story around Europa, but it's really stories because a lot of it's based on history. So the Protestant Reformation happens, and eventually Habsburg ends up on this throne of Spain or Castile. And the French Revolution happens, and the Dutch republics in the lowlands break away and reform the Netherlands, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not really a cohesive story as it is lots of small stories that are woven together in a context of a history.
Okay.
If you
so are those stories
you're
is something
sort of making the story in real time?
I was going to ask if it's more of it is describing some events you are doing and thus creating story, or is it telling a story to you, or is it more capturing descriptions of what you've done?
So it does a little bit of both, but in the latter case where it tells you about things, most of the time those things are historical.
Okay.
In some way.
So it's adding context to an action you've done based on actual history.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Correct.
So with that, knowing that that's an element you experience within that game, does that add value to you for the gameplay itself, for the reason you got into the game?
Sure. Okay. And not only that, as we talked about on this show before, it's gotten me into European history in a big way too.
Yeah, exactly. Examples there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I say that because for you, Todd, and then I'll transition to you, Ken, to get a little more of your perspective as the examples you brought. The reason you walked in the door for playing the game is because of the win conditions and the environment in the game that it provides, correct?
For the most part,
for Europa, getting into it. Was it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So
for
all the things that I am playing now, yes, I'm struggling to think of a game that I played that I did not like the mechanics of.
Okay.
And I'm struggling to come up with one. There are plenty of games that I did not like the mechanics of that
you choose not to play.
Put down and never touched again.
You're like, nope, that's garbage. Don't touch.
Point and click adventure games
are there any
perfect example?
Oh, you mean point click, like what I was going to say,
Monkey
like
Island.
Monkey Island is a classic. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's
not my jam.
Yeah, and that's good to know, and I appreciate your language on that because I was going to ask to transition into Ken, but for you, Todd, is there a game that you forgave some level of mechanics that were not ideal because the experience around those mechanics were still so compelling for whatever reason? It's funny. It's the story being told is wonderful. This is so damn pretty. I want to see what's next. That you continued to play, even though it wasn't ideal, because unfortunately, there is the case that this isn't binary. You don't have many games that have such horrendous gameplay that they're unplayable, but the graphics, story, and everything else is so amazing that you have to play it, right? There's usually some gradient, some level of combination of where some succeed better than others. That's what makes this conversation hard. But I'm just like, for you in general, is there something that when you, after you experience it, you're like, I enjoyed it, but damn, that was a shite game?
No.
Okay.
The one that comes closest would be some of the later or more recent patches of World of Warships.
Okay.
But even then, that's all mechanics. It's nothing to do with
tweaks to what already existed.
Well, no. I disagreed with the mechanical choices that were being made in the game. The game is still the game. The contrivance or the framing around the game is still the same as it ever was. But as soon as they did enough made enough mechanical additions or changes that I disagreed with, it was just like I'm not gonna play this again.
Okay.
Ever.
They took away from some of the things you appreciated about it.
See also Hearthstone.
Yep. Okay.
There are others.
So Ken, kind of back to you then. Have you played any games and things where you were compelled, and you kind of mentioned with the Telltale games, so much by the story that the mechanics were less important to you than experiencing the story and getting through it?
Definitely the Telltale games, for sure, because every single one of those, the mechanics are either extremely basic or almost non-existent. You don't play it to, I think there's a couple like scenes where you have to aim a gun in a kind of like in a quick time kind of event, but like it's so sudden and surprising, and you don't use a gun normally, but neither does the character, which is kind of, I guess, the point now that I think about it. That it's mostly just surprising and slightly irritating, I guess, almost. Whereas for the character, obviously, it's terrifying and adrenaline inducing. So I kind of get why they did it, I suppose. So yeah, I guess with those games you forgive the lack of any mechanical complexity in exchange for interesting story entirely. Yeah.
Okay, and I bring that up because, and I'll try to kind of bring my own opinion as I've been interviewing you guys about this, because there are a lot of games I've played that the mechanics are a draw to it. There's something about the way it is played that I enjoy. I think a lot of RTSs and stuff where there's two sides. There's gameplay / story that I enjoy when it's done well, and then there's just gameplay that I enjoy. So I think to the Supreme Commander games and stuff like that, a lot of the RTSs, in most RTSs I've played, and I'll include this from a top-down perspective, just that kind of feel of a game like League of Legends, Here's a New Earth, those kind of games as such, where the story to me was ancillary. It was, what am I doing with the gameplay that I enjoy? The interaction I'm doing in the engine, the clicking, the stuff, things like that, enhanced by the graphics, the sound, the UI, all those ways of touching the game mechanics that I enjoyed. But I've also witnessed in some of those things, like with League of Legends more recently, a lot of the stuff they've been adding into, or aspects of even down to StarCraft with some of the things we're hearing about the story of Ghost, of, I forget her name, the actual sniper, or the gal or Kerrigan, right? The story of Kerrigan within StarCraft and stuff that enhance some of the reasons to why I was in that specific environment, why I was doing the click and do whatever for that. Because in some ways, especially with RTSs, for me personally, I have found that the gameplay mechanic becomes repetitive to a degree that's almost dumb. That I can do the maths to say, how can I do this faster to a higher efficiency? But at some point, and this is why for me personally, I don't play games on Facebook, those kind of games, the classic, what is it? The games that have, or like Clicker Heroes or things like that, things that have games that are, you do the same activity the entire game. It just slightly changes the look of it so that you feel like you are progressing in some way. To me, those aren't compelling because it has neither story nor really good gameplay, actually. Clicker Heroes is
How many
literally
hours
just
do you
time
have in Clicker
wasting.
Heroes?
Yeah, but that's mostly leaving it on in the background because it self-plays versus actively having it in the foreground and doing something.
I know,
in it.
it's just funny
Yeah.
to point out.
No,
the
if you look at the thousands
that you
of
have
hours,
played.
yes, when I leave the computer on with Clicker Heroes running because it keeps leveling you up over time for an entire weekend because I'm off on a vacation, it still counts as hours in game, even though nothing was I doing actually part of it. So yeah, that number alone I would argue against. But for me, there's been a balance where I see the enhancement of both, and it's a challenge because I have played games that have less nuance to the mechanic for win-lose, like a quick time event that honestly you miss it. All the newer Tomb Raider games, they'll have momentary quick time events that catch you as a way that they're really trying to tell you this or show you this action beautiful scene that they've rendered, but they don't want you to just watch it. So they give you a win-lose condition of, oh shoot, all of a sudden we give you a quick do something, hit a button, hit a direction, something within the time, or we kill you, or some lesser extent happens. In Tomb Raider, it's usually a graphic and glorious death that's in its way somewhat rewarding, but then they usually put you in a perspective where you get to back up time just enough to try it again to potentially get a win condition. And at some points it can be annoying, and you're like, damn it, I just want to get past this. But they try to throw something in there to break up the I'm just watching a movie, in the sense of, what was it? One of the Final Fantasy games, I think there are several games that have been described as more interactive
that had like
movies.
a 45-minute cutscene
Yeah,
or whatever.
that literally to even get into the
crazy.
game, you watch 45 minutes of movie before an action is required of the user, right? Of the person playing. Now, I will
No, thank you. That does not.
Well, so
me.
there's a thing there, right? I think there's a balance because for me, I see the benefit of both, and I have seen levels where a compelling story has brought me back to an experience that arguably was not that amazing from a gameplay perspective. I wasn't being asked to do much very technical time-related maths interactions with the engine to create a success story. I had to do minimal to see the story being portrayed. And it's even to a level in FPSs and stuff that have story elements, choosing to play some from a different level of difficulty versus another. Sometimes, because I am behind in a series and people keep telling me it's a wonderful experience and there's a great story, I have reduced the difficulty of a game to normal, just so I can just play through it in a little more efficient time frame. Versus other times I'll get into a game like the single-player experience of some of the Halos or most FPSs or the Call of Duty and stuff, where I know it's actually a pretty fun, good game, but along with it, I know it's 6 hours long if I play it on normal or easy. So I choose to play it on like expert or a harder mode that will maybe extend the gameplay artificially, or I have to be myself more precise to get to those story elements to extend it out to maybe 12 to 15 hours of me experiencing the engine. But I'm also asking myself to be more precise in that moment. And so there's a balance there I've chosen. And so along those lines, it's interesting because I feel like, to Todd's general discussion argument, gameplay is very important to even framing the aspect of what you're doing in that experience. However, for me, the experience can be heavily influenced, even to a point where it extends beyond, for me, the value of the gameplay with such great execution of story, fun, easy user interface, sound, graphics, all those things that help me enjoy my time in that experience, even if there may be some quirks to the gameplay. I would say Grand Theft Auto is an example. Grand Theft Auto, the mechanics of the game are shit. There's almost no precision in control.
You think so?
The control precision's terrible. Without auto assist in so many levels, it's garbage. Well, I've seen it redone.
Part of the,
you say part of the joy or feel of it. It's part of the feel you get used to. But I would argue the difference between Grand Theft Auto and Mafia. Mafia as a game has better mechanics in how you play the game. But Grand Theft Auto has
you're misunderstanding. It's a design choice. It's not a glitch. It's an intentional design choice.
No, you're right. It's design that they were.
It's the goofiness element.
No, they were lazy. No. You're talking about the one that's not Grand Theft Auto. That is running around hitting people with large purple phalluses.
Saints Row.
Saints Row. Saints Row is the cheese version of Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto is the imprecise version of Mafia. Well, I'm
No,
just
so I'm
letting.
talking about Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft
Yeah, I
Auto
know.
has a chaos element that is part of the design. So when you're driving down a street, for example, there's actually a timer that goes off inside the game that pays attention to how long you've been driving without hitting something or something crazy happening. So generally speaking, if you're watching by random chance, when you first start driving, everything on the road is pretty sane. But the longer you drive, the more chaos element is increased, right? This counter is
But that's not
increased.
what I'm talking
So the
about.
chances of a police car chasing
No,
you
that's not the part I'm talking about.
or chasing somebody else
I'm talking
or a
about.
motorcycle crashing into you is intentionally
No,
increased.
that's not
And
what
I
I'm
think
talking
that's
about,
the same
Ken.
reason that they have, for example, the combat elements in the game being difficult to control and so on, because it's supposed to be that it's goofy and there's a high chance of random stuff happening. It's
That's
supposed
not
to
what
be
I'm talking
chaotic.
about. I'm not talking
That's a
about
part of
the.
design, I think.
I'm not talking about the random number generator. I'm talking about the imprecision of controls, the floatiness of driving in the engine, the weirdness that gets into when you start bouncing off of things. That is to me just
That's it. All that stuff's
lazy.
intentional.
Yeah, I would argue they were trying to design such a big game that that's not where they focused. Todd?
So both can be true. So it can be a design choice, and Wayne, it can be a design choice that you don't like,
True.
which is a perfectly reasonable reason to set a game down and never play it. I was uncharitable a couple of weeks ago when talking about The Last of Us 2, and the Mistress of Giggles actually brought this up to me, and I feel like it's really important to say this.
Okay.
It's very, very possible that I am mischaracterizing the kind of game The Last of Us 2 is, because she's convinced that it's a survival horror game, and
Gotcha.
that survival horror games might not be my jam. Because The Last of Us 2 would be my first one.
Okay.
Really.
Okay.
Right?
Well, and I think that's
to be fully to do full disclosure, I have to sort of say that I had not thought of The Last of Us 2 as a survival horror game.
Okay.
I thought of The Last of Us 2 as a stealth assassination game.
Gotcha.
And as a stealth assassination game, I don't think the mechanics are very good.
Gotcha. Well, but so I'm saying that and what I'm providing is a way that it's not to say I don't enjoy the Grand Theft games. I just think that's a piece that they lack none versus others. And it is a way I was playing the game. For you, Todd, what you just brought up about what game you were trying to experience or how you're experiencing it, it makes sense though, because one of the beautiful things in this world is we have games for everybody if you really go look for them. And not every game out there am I going to give a crap about, because there's a lot of games that don't fit what I'm looking for in that combination of gameplay, story, sound, graphics, all those things, right? And there's just some that I can see and I can look at and say, that is beautiful, and I have no desire to exist there. I don't want to be a part of it. There's other ones where like, wow, to complete this game successfully, you have to be so skilled in this way, Super Meat Boy, that I don't actually want to spend the time to do that. It's no longer entertaining fun to me. The challenge goes beyond what I'm looking for. And so there's ways we can gradiate it. Now, I will say, and this is going to throw another thing in the fire for you, to get ready for this, I looked at some of these conversations of games that are out there, and there is an element that people like to hear some valuation of those various aspects of the game to help them decide if they want to spend time there, right? That I want to see a review for some reason, and often as humanity, it seems we are compelled to see numbers attached to it as a way to compare options, one versus another. We do it empirically across the board with so many things in our lives, be it which car am I going to go buy because this one is rated in a certain way, it can go this fast, it can handle this way, it can do these things. So we kind of look for that, for ways to help us decide what we want to go spend our time and resource on. So specific, and I say this with some malice involved, I went to Metacritic as a resource that a lot of people see as a way to value so many various things we can partake in entertainment in around the world. It is a site that has perpetuated itself as a place people can see and put up their own evaluations of entertainment, right? And so I looked up Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima, because that was part of that discussion last week. Ghost of Tsushima on the Metacritic score, so the like reviewer non-user input score, got an 83 based on 110 critic reviews. Last of Us 2 got a Metascore of 94 based on 117 critic reviews. Okay? So based on that score alone, Metacritic, for whatever valuations they use, is saying that Last of Us Part 2 is a numerically better game, 10% or higher than Ghost of Tsushima. All right? Now, to continue this before I get your guys' thoughts on it, the user score for Ghost of Tsushima is 9.3 out of essentially 10 out of over 13,000 reviews. The Last of Us 2 is a 5.6 out of 10 out of some 137,000 reviews. So hearing those two things about these, I'll start with you, Ken. What are your thoughts based on just hearing how these two games in some way are arguably comparable in that they both receive scores for what people's experience was with them or thoughts on them are?
So this is actually surprisingly similar to a lot of the research I do. So I worked for a long time in a field called operational research, which is largely about how to maximize efficiency of what you own or what you can own or what you control, like employees or resources or whatever, and how to most efficiently use them for certain tasks, right? And there's actually a way of measuring in this field. There's a way of measuring goodness of a solution, right? And that's very easy. If you want to talk about how fast a car is, right, as your example was, Wayne, that's very easy to do, right? Because it's a scale of 0 to however many miles per hour can do, right? So it's a very simple metric, and the higher the better, right? Easy. But in reality, you actually care about the color of the car, the efficiency of the fuel consumption, the price of the car, the running price of the car, repairability, all this stuff, right? And that becomes what's called a multi-objective optimization problem, right? Multi-objective. And the difficulty with this is several-fold over, but one is some of these objectives can be contrary, right? If you want to talk about the speed of a car, that's almost absolutely opposite of price, right? If you want to minimize cost but maximize speed, like you can't just look at those two metrics because you'll never find a good place, right? They're against each other. So you need to find a good metric, a good way of finding an optimal solution. But to do that, you need to decide what's important to you. So each of us, when we're thinking about video games, each of us have our own preference for what we enjoy in video games. For me, it's largely storyline. I do really like good stories in games. But in terms of how much I play a game, I definitely spend a lot more time in games that I can optimize in. Right, like
Okay.
Factorio, World of Warcraft,
Okay.
Diablo. These are games which I can put a lot of time into because I can like min max, right? And that's something that I personally care about in a game. And what this is called, if you have like 1,000 different games that you're judging, and you judge them by your own personal criteria of what you enjoy the most, what you can create is what's called a Pareto front, a Pareto optimal front. So imagine a line graph, right? And you have our scatter plot.
You're using big words, doctor.
1,000 dots. I know. Imagine you have 1,000 dots over the scatter plot, right? And the ones that are furthest away from the origin, from the little on the XY graph, right? The ones that are furthest away, you can just draw a line over, and all of those are your optimals, right? They're all equally as good as each other based on your criteria, right? So you can say, for example, if you really enjoy this game like God of War, which is, it's console, which is a down, right? That's annoying. I prefer playing PC. It's got great visuals. That's an up for me. The audio's okay, so I give it a middle ground. The voice acting's great, give it an up, so on, right? And then Factorio is on the other end of the scale, but still very highly rated, because I would say that it's got terrible visuals. It looks like crap. Like Factorio does not look good. The music is repetitive and dull, but the optimization is so enjoyable. I love the game. I've put thousands of hours into it for various reasons, right? So even though they're completely opposite, you can still say that you rate both these games highly. So in the end, my point is when we're talking about how to a single objective number of how to rate a game, I don't think these game websites are great because they give an overall score and that's it. What it should be is an overall score catered to your personal user profile, so that when you look at a website, you can look at the reviews of people who have similar taste in games to you, or what games you have enjoyed. So if you enjoyed playing Future Cop LAPD, Psychic Force, and other obscure PlayStation 1 video games, then somebody who has that set of video games in their history and then rates Factorio, that's probably going to be similar to your viewpoint on Factorio, not what somebody who only played Factorio and Satisfactory, right? They're going to have a completely different opinion on the games. And my main point is that an overall objective video score can't exist in the world. It won't truly represent everybody. It'll be an average, which represents nobody. That's the truth of it. And so instead, we need to look at the objective views of people who are similar to us. And that's my thesis. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
So to you, Todd, and kind of that same thing, you heard those scores that are done by Metacritic, and I actually did similar things on PC Gamer because I used to love some of their reviews personally, where I looked at Death Stranding versus Super Hot, a new one coming out, because there's a difference between like visual storytelling and stuff like that versus empirical gameplay elements, right? And it ran into kind of similar kind of things, but just focusing on like the Metacritic scores there, and you saw one arguably higher. What are your thoughts when you see those scores?
So the joke that I made a couple of weeks ago was that LGBT representation was worth 11 ratings points, right? I don't really believe that, but it was a funny way to sort of get at the crux of what I was annoyed about this whole rating thing. The analog that I want to use is the Hearthstone Reviews, because I actually wrote a review for Hearthstone on VTWProductions.com 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So if you go to Metacritic and you look at the reviews for Hearthstone, you will find, I think it's like 42 positive reviews. Yeah, 42 positive reviews and no negative reviews. The lowest score was from NZ Gamer, and it was 79 out of 100. I went and looked at my review, and I did it out of 10, but if you abstract it to 100, I gave it a 35.
Okay.
Right? So less than half of the lowest Metacritic critic review. Okay? So what are the differences between those reviews and my review? I spent 800 words talking about poor set design and all of the casual CCG variants that were missing from Hearthstone.
Okay.
Right? Like it annoyed the hell out of me that it is impossible for you to play Hearthstone with your friends. And I say that purposely because you can play with a friend, and then you can play with another friend.
But not a group of friends in some kind of controlled experience. Oh, I think we might have got a hiccup from Todd right at that critical moment as he was discussing it. That's all right. It'll come back. He came back earlier in the pre-show, guys. He'll come back again. So you wait for that. But thank you, Ken, for linking to Todd's specific article at vtwproductions.com so you guys can go check that out and read specifically what he's bringing up. Because what I think one of the points, there he's back, that Todd's getting to
I am back.
Is the idea that that some things get pushed, especially from a website review perspective, almost for an agenda or something where people kind of jump on it's almost like the review bomb or the not canceled, but the other side of that, where people try to jump on the same idea of something versus giving it an honest individual perspective.
Right. So if you go through all of these critic reviews, I think I found at most like a couple of paragraphs on poor set design. And it was in one review, and it literally 2 paragraphs, and it's just like the paraphrase of what was written was, "Boy, it really does suck when you play against lots of legendary cards," and it's like you have missed the point entirely.
Interesting.
By writing that, so like, all of these reviews are just like, yep, it's a Blizzard game, and there's the visuals are great, and interactive tables and card art and fluff. And I like fluff too, don't get me wrong, but the most important aspect of a CCG is the quality of the design of its core set. And the core set design of Hearthstone sucked. Not only that, during the beta for Hearthstone, the game designers wrote something called a card balance philosophy post.
Okay.
And they put it up on the Hearthstone main page in a blog. And they were talking about the reasons why they nerfed things. Like, great. That sets an expectation. And they've violated that expectation every single subsequent patch for like a year and a half after that. And it's just like, don't write the balance philosophy. Just come out and say we're going to nerf stuff at random. We're going to nerf Pyroblast because we don't want you to play minionless decks.
Gotcha.
So then I can know that your game is badly designed and not play it. Because minionless decks have been in CCGs since CCGs were born.
Yep.
Like, we don't want stasis because stasis is not interactive. No, your whole game is not interactive. Like, everybody plays whatever they want to with impunity on their turn. Like, it's not that complicated. It is barely get the bottom of your feet wet shallow, right? This is not complex. So, that's the analog.
Well, no,
When I look at scores like that, when I look at scores like that, I tried to figure out what the reviewers were playing in both cases.
Okay.
I think they're playing
'Cause,
give us money, please, as always.
Well, okay, yeah, still sure there's that aspect too, because advertising is tied to everything, unfortunately. But I tried, and I've watched the Misters of Giggles play The Last of Us 2. And there are multiple points after which I put the game down, where I was watching it and going, I would not play this anymore.
Okay.
Like, it is good that I am not reviewing games, I guess.
Well, okay, but you say that, Todd, but at the same time, and I think there's a crossover between what you're saying about your personal experience and what Ken said about how to evaluate games, right? Because sites want to have reasons for people to come to them, their own selling of advertisement and sales, right? They want to be considered some kind of, not gatekeeper, but a resource for people to come to for some level of should I care effect, right? In some way or another, they're trying to create this one number to rule them all kind of thing. The challenge of, and where I wanted to take this discussion further, but it would take longer than this show will allow us since we're about at the top of the hour here, is the value of that rating and what it means to when it comes to things like awards and stuff like that, right? There is a potential real world value to what those numbers mean. From an individual perspective, what you're saying, Todd, about whether you could review, I think you absolutely could. But to what Ken was saying, it's about knowing who your reviewer is. And so one of the challenges is Metacritic or something like that can have just a plethora of numbers thrown at it. For me, I prefer things almost like what Steam has done with curators or people that I follow their individual tastes and how their recommendation engine bases things on likes to things I have spent time and energy in to at least give me an awareness of. That I agree with what you were saying, Ken. A review has better value if you know the reviewer and where they come from. That by itself, a number is somewhat meaningless. However, it is used as a way to gauge and push things towards some level. And that I was going to get to, and again, not enough time today, video game awards. Awards in general, across the board for anything out there, be it book writing awards to movie awards to, all those things, the SAGs, everything out there, right, where awards are levied that give another stretch to can turn into monetary returns, right? So whatever gets game of the year, and I actually tried to look up before the show what it equates when game of the year is attached or awarded to an actual game. What does that translate to sales afterwards and things like that, right?
I think it would be fair to characterize that there's probably a bump in sales.
Likely, right? I couldn't find empirical numbers, but then it gets back to the quality of any award being given, because you can also get like tags on your website that says you were whatever level of performance or something that you basically buy, versus it actually being a thing. Arguably, you can almost buy awards, or you get a flux of the environment of the gaming, what people are doing now and what media is saying towards pushing towards one game being awarded something versus another. And because there's a monetary return on that, I think it can be argued that with just one score provided, if you were to go into the Game of the Year season, this coming thing, you would arguably say that Last of Us Part 2 has a higher chance of getting awarded a Game of the Year award, specifically for like the Game of the Year, than Ghost of Tsushima in this sense. And so there is importance to understanding what leads to those numbers. And one of the things I want to get to is, to wrap things up from my perspective, a lot to what Ken, you were saying. You had brought up that there are aspects you can judge about games and kind of your scale about how certain things apply, gameplay versus audio versus all those same things we were saying in the, that I've been saying throughout. That I think the best scales, and I forget where this stopped. I remember getting magazines that I used to see it done this way, and it pisses me off I can't find them anymore, or that they went away from it, where they would do an aggregate score. But when they did that aggregate one score, below it, they provided how they came to that score with each of those sections having its own point value that were somewhat equated. And I missed that.
Do you remember the old Game Pros?
That might have been it, yeah.
From back, and I'm going way back, like when the year read 199.
Yes, way back.
Like way, way back. And I want to say that, like, not only were the things subdivided by like graphics, sound,
yes,
gameplay, story, yada yada yada, but I want to say if there was disagreement within the review team, like there was a small inset where
one of them had that.
Right.
Yes, it was like a Supreme Court decision, right? It was like a Supreme Court decision in the U.S. You had the majority, and then you had the dissenting view.
Opinion.
I love that. That's a great idea.
Yes. I want to say every fiber of my being wants me to say that it's Game Pro, so we're going to...
well, that and Shadow Vice is saying that Game Informer used to do some level of it as well.
Okay.
So one of those magazines, but something way back, and it's been lost, because I can't find any reviews today that take the effort, maybe that's the issue, right? The time and challenge to do something like that, to break it apart and make it so that me as a reader, as a consumer, can look at why something got a high view. Because if I see a game that has max, and they even had some that was kind of just generally arbitrary of like fun value or some X factor that they would put in some of the reviews that I'd seen, but you'd have like gameplay, 5 out of 5, art direction or something, 2 out of 5, sound, 2 out of 5, but UI, 4 out of 5, and like multiplayer, 4 or 5, replayability, 5 out of 5, something like that. I may look at that versus something that had gameplay and replayability at like a 3 out of 5 and the rest 5s and say, well, but I want the one that has the great gameplay, UI, and replayability. What's that about? And I hate that granularity is gone today, or at least I've not been able to find it. So if somebody does know where that still exists, pimp it out to us, VTWShowX at Gmail. Let us know, because I'll pimp it out to everybody if there are still sites that do that. And so in lieu of that,
in general, we really could do with more like ethical game review sites. And we, me and Todd talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago, actually. This concept of, we don't want it to be gamer-gatey, right? We're not trying to go down this path, but there are a lot of game review sites out there that are just given money to review things, and you can see it. It's obvious. It's evident.
Well, you start seeing the same words and trend go across certain areas that you're like, that looks awfully coordinated. And I think to me that reduces value of what that site or place is presenting.
Well, and the prevalence of direct interactions between game publishers and or developers and influencers, where if you want a preview copy of a game so that you can make your videos early so they can come out as soon as the embargo shuts off, you have to say these 5 things about the game. Right?
Yeah.
So that's happening on at least a couple of on at least a couple. There are at least a couple of examples where that's happening. And it's shady as all get out. I mean, just really, really bad. And so we're back to this paradigm where I don't even know who to trust.
Yep.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, so there are things I know. If it says Polygon, Kotaku, Destructoid, RPS,
IGN.
IGN, like I can ignore
So
it.
many. Yeah.
You can just take that folded up, throw it in a bin. Like I can't wait for the digital publishing apocalypse to hit all of those sites. Like I will be very excited when that happens.
And that it also makes places like Metacritic no longer reliable because they aggregate from these sources. So
Well, so
their data.
right, but as we talked about last week, you can't trust user scores either.
Yeah,
There's
because
a possibility of review bombing and or counter review bombing.
Yep.
So
Oh no, you're right. And and Shadow Vice says it great, right? I find I have to trust my friends more than review sites. And I agree.
yeah.
I know
Word
my
of mouth.
friends' personalities, and that's still probably the best advertising. But unfortunately, the thing that gets perpetuated out there to the masses is some level of what they and media and other people have accepted as standards or something. And one of the things I actually watched specifically on PC Gamer that I missed because I found it in some of their 2010 reviews and 11 reviews links, they had a link underneath that said, here is how we evaluate a game. It would link to their like standards of review. And I will tell you, when I looked at their 2020 reviews, that link did not exist. It was no longer contained right below their score that had this, and if you'd like to know more, click here. And it hurts because it makes it feel like they also have gone down that path. Because I think I used to get some reviews from PC Gamer I enjoyed. And now I feel like that's lost as well. So
and it was something we talked about on the show last week. What would really do everybody a big service is for there to be an industry standard rubric.
Yes.
For enthusiast product reviews, right?
Hey guys,
so
that's
video
our
gaming
next
would
big
have
thing.
one. Consumer electronics would have one. And maybe it starts with one and then gets subdivided. So soundbars and TVs and
maybe this is what we bring up on our
our
Reddit. Maybe this is the discussion we should start on our Reddit and continue into like the subreddits of gaming and stuff. Is what is the rubric? What do we want game reviews to provide us for it to be valuable? And maybe we host that discussion, because there was a comment that was a little higher up saying maybe VTW Productions should be where we go to host these well-described and thought-out reviews and start a place there where we hold people to that standard. Let's host it on ours.
Hey, let's just use the Reddit, right? I mean, we can already.
Well, I want that to be the discussion.
Certain things as verified and approved.
Well, I want that to be the discussion, but a place like VTW could be a home for where you could go query for that review that is vetted in our way. Anyhow, but yeah, so there's thoughts there. It is time for us to wrap things up. I do want to go back to, we didn't get into the like real argument back and forth, so hopefully you actually heard some levels of agreement we all had as to how there can be value in people's gaming experience. And really, there's.
Thank you. You jogged my memory, Wayne. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you
No,
off.
right, please.
But I just want to say, and I want everybody out there to know, if the reason that you decide to play a game is the story, it's not as if I think less of you.
Well, Todd probably thinks less of you, but
or a member of the community as a person. Like whatever draws you to a game is whatever draws you to a game. I'm unfortunately I'm a victim of being a math guy, and so to me definitions are axiomatic.
Yeah.
And so like once we establish what a game is, and then and what a video game is, like to me, the thing that I look at is the things that make a video game a video game. But whatever it is that you use personally, that draws you in and makes you play and makes you put 1,447 hours into the game, that's fine. Do what you do.
Yeah.
I had a bit of a visceral reaction to it. I wanted to talk about it, and we've turned it into 3 shows. So,
well, so you say that, but even when I had a quick moment of talking about this during D&D night with Shadow Vice and some of the others, the emotion that came up from them was significant because I think people care. And people have their own things they personalize for why they care about one game over another or over another. I know in general, with anything I enjoy in the world, I have a piece where I want to share because I have an enjoyment. But I also understand the challenge you run into people who just don't, right? And so you say, but this thing's awesome. They're like, nope, that's garbage. And you have to accept that there is a difference in all of our values and our personal experiences and things like that that can lean one way or another. And it doesn't have to take away from yours, but it just might mean that we don't all congeal in the same way.
And this is a more broad personality flaw that has been highlighted to me on many occasions. When I argue and I get passionate, sometimes I skip steps. That happens too, but it can happen generally. And so what ends up happening is I end up misrepresenting, or I end up representing points of view that I did not intend to represent because I skipped steps in my cognitive Lego. So I don't think that happened here. I think I put all the blocks together, but for future reference, I think that may happen. And if you hear something that I say and you have any
reaction,
any questions or anything about how I said it or what I said, don't feel free. Don't hesitate, feel free to ask in the Reddit or send an email to the email address, and I'll be happy to clarify.
Yeah. Please yell directly back at us and tell us why we're wrong.
Yes.
Just speaking of your speaker, that'll be fine. Yeah.
Speaking of which, I'm going to probably make an adjustment to next week's show for this case, because we do have 2 emails that had come in prior to the show to be discussed, but we went in such a way that, man, it's amazing how we can eat up time, but in a great, fun way. And I don't want to negate that to talk about them. So I think I'll probably focus on cleanup earlier next week with the highlight that, yes. Ionis and Mr. Wasick, we will get to your emails because I do appreciate they're in there. They're still tagged for us to talk about. So please don't hesitate to write in. We do read and go through every email that we get. So let's do that. And please react. Let us know, both in the Reddit, in the email, if you'd like us to read on air and participate in that way, what your thoughts are on what we discussed today. What did we miss? What would you like us to go into more depth on? Because this is a subject that we could pick apart and go so far in. I still feel like in several ways we're at a high level of it, and we only dug like a few inches deeper into the crust still of this whole discussion about how we evaluate value in stuff games.
Do you want every show to be the Star Wars show?
Dude, we didn't even touch Star Wars. Hey, one of these days, one of these days we may come back and do a sense of not truly a rantathon in that sense, but some way of balance of a open-ended, how long you guys got? We're going to talk type show at some point that we can plan for everybody.
I would love that.
Obviously, we have a lot to say. You have a lot to say. We want to keep the discussion going. We appreciate you for participating. With that a note, Ken, could you do us the favor, the honor as always, to help us wrap things off, not only to tell people where they can get in contact to us, but also just to kind of give your end to the show for us so that we can get out of here this week and give people back their start to this coming gaming session and week coming on.
Absolutely. You've been listening to Show X live on twitch.tv/VGW Show X and all the other places that we're also on. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to my dogs from Mika Sorona, who said, "Tell puppies I love them." Mika Sorona says she loves you. Okay, that's that done. You can check us out at various places around the interwebs. You can support us on patreon.com/showx for a minimum of $1 per month, which is very little, but it keeps us afloat, and we very much appreciate every single donor. You can send us an emails to vtwshowx@gmail.com. Check us out on reddit.com/r/showx. You can be sure to subscribe and follow to us here on Twitch as well if you haven't already done that. And you can also actually rehost us. We very much appreciate that. You can also set up your channel to automatically rehost us in your own user settings. And just Google it. It's easy enough to do. And that way all of your followers would also see ShowX being live through you, which is much appreciated too. Be sure to retweet us and such on Twitter. You can find us there at twitter.com/VGWShowX, twitter.com/DocDead, and twitter.com/DrKenRead for the show. For Mr. Wayne, for myself, myself. Todd does not have a Twitter until I convince him again. You can check us out on Facebook.com, search for Show Space X there, and you will find us no problem. We share whenever we go live there, as well as the odd meme too. I think that's pretty much everything. So thank you so much for tuning in today, folks, and thank you for having us, Mr. Wayne. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you guys for joining in. Also, that last note, it'll be in the show notes. But if you haven't checked it out and would like to, in these times, help protect yourself while also calling out your angst against the world, please jump in and grab one of the upcoming face masks that are themed with the VTW Gaming logo and our big yellow smiley face to jump in there, because we'd like to let you highlight to everyone else how we are versus you while at the same time looking out for your health. So jump into that. If you have any questions, please message me, and we'll get you on the list for face masks coming up. Thank you, guys. We'll see you again next week. It's been fun. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. See you in the next zombie.